Look closely at a map of Africa and you will notice something strange. Many of its borders are perfectly straight lines, ruler straight, as if someone simply drew them with a pencil. And that is almost exactly what happened. This is the story of one of the greatest acts of map-making in all of history, and one of the most damaging. For most of human history, Africa was not divided into the countries we know today. It was a vast patchwork of thousands of kingdoms, peoples, and cultures, with borders that shifted and blended. Then, in the late 1800s, Europe arrived, hungry for land, for resources, and for power. And the great European empires began to carve Africa up between themselves. In 1884, they gathered in a single room in the city of Berlin. European diplomats, sitting around a giant map of a continent most of them had never even visited. There was not a single African in that room. Over just a few months, they drew lines across the map, dividing Africa into colonies like slices of a cake. They followed lines of longitude and latitude, rivers they had vaguely heard of, and sometimes simply convenient straight lines. They paid almost no attention to who actually lived there. And this is the very heart of the problem. Those borders cut straight through the ancient homelands of African peoples. A single ethnic group might suddenly find itself split between 2, 3, or even 4 different colonies, while rival groups with long histories of conflict were forced together inside the same new lines. When these colonies later became independent nations, they kept those same borders. The straight lines drawn in Berlin simply became the borders of modern Africa. And the consequences are still felt today. Many of Africa's conflicts since independence have their roots in these artificial imported borders. Peoples were divided across frontiers. The Maasai split between Kenya and Tanzania. The Somalis scattered across 5 different territories. Groups who shared everything suddenly cut apart by lines they never chose. So why don't African nations simply redraw the borders to make more sense? Because that could open a door to chaos. If one border is reopened, hundreds of others could be challenged. So most African nations agreed decades ago to keep the colonial borders, however deeply flawed they are. It is a hard bargain, living with lines drawn by strangers in order to avoid something even worse. The straight borders of Africa are a scar left by a single room in Europe, a reminder that lines on a map are rarely ever just lines. They decide who is a neighbor and who is a stranger, who shares a country and who is divided by one. Africa is still living with the map that Europe drew, a continent shaped, to this very day, by decisions made in a room that its own people were never allowed to enter. If you enjoy stories where geography shapes the fate of nations, subscribe. We unravel a new one every week.